This podcast is sponsored by BCH. BCH have been providing flats-specific reinstatement cost assessments for almost 20 years, with the building's insurance premium often contributing to a large portion of a service charge. BCH can provide specialist, third-party, unbiased, RICS-compliant reinstatement cost assessments, allowing the managing agent maximum compliance and best practice and the placement of the most competitive buildings insurance. Their commitment to accessible, prompt and accurate buildings insurance valuations has seen BCH secure the best first step in buildings insurance for over 600,000 flat owners. For a quote, please contact info@bch.uk.com today.
Welcome to another episode of Beyond Four Walls, where I talk about the experiences of those making a significant impact in the world of real estate and beyond. I'm your host, Jodie Fraser, and today I have the privilege of introducing a remarkable leader who's stepping into a pivotal role at the Hollie Gazzard Trust, Jane Harvey, the newly appointed CEO. Jane brings with her over 2 decades of experience in broadcast journalism, having worked with prestigious organisations like the BBC and ITV. Her commitment to combating stalking and abuse has been unwavering since she first reported on the subject in 1999, travelling to the United States to engage with leading experts in risk and safeguarding. Jane's journey continued as she contributed to shaping national policy through her work with Tracey Morgan's charity, networking for Surviving Stalking, and as a founding member of the National Stalking Helpline. Her passion for the cause was further ignited when she connected with the Hollie Gazzard Trust, inspired by Hollie's story shared by Nick Gazzard on the radio. Jane's dedication saw her take on a frontline role in 2017, providing invaluable support to high-risk stalking victims in Gloucestershire, an initiative born from the Trust and now benefiting from statutory funding. And today I'll talk to Jane about her remarkable journey and vision for the future as she leads the Hollie Gazzard Trust into a new era. Welcome, Jane. Thank you for being here.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure, Jodie. Really, really lovely.
I'm so grateful. Thank you. Can you share a little bit about your background and what led you ultimately to working with the Trust again?
Yes, it feels like it's been quite a long journey. My background is as a journalist, and I, from a very young age, wanted to be a reporter because I was very motivated by injustice and wanting to do something about it. I read quite a lot of Enid Blyton as a young girl.
Oh, me too.
I think that probably influenced me quite a lot. I hated unfairness and injustice from a really early age, and that was one of the motivating factors for me to be a journalist. And I was really lucky. After I finished university, I got a job working in television, and I enjoyed it so much. It was such an exciting career, and I got to meet all sorts of different people and tell stories on behalf of people. So it was a real privilege. And I know journalism has got a bit of a bad reputation, but it's really important. And I'm still hugely passionate about telling people's stories. I had a job working in news, sort of as a news reporter. And after that, HTV Wales, as it was then, was launching a consumer programme called The Ferret. I worked on that, championing various consumer causes for quite a few years. And after that, I then went to Leeds, to Yorkshire Television, where I had the opportunity to report on a network documentary on stalking, which was a massive opportunity. And I was really, really honoured to have been given that privilege. But if I'm honest, Jodie, I knew nothing about stalking, and I just thought this is a really great opportunity for my career. Mm. And when I was reading the briefing notes, as you do as a reporter, I was reading about the case that we were going to be reporting on, and it remains today one of the most shocking stalking cases I have ever come across. So shocking was it that it led to the introduction of the Protection from Harassment Act in 1997. And I was reading the details in the briefing notes. I couldn't believe what I was reading. It was a case about a woman who had sat next to a photocopier in an office at work and had been friendly to a man that was a work colleague. He had started to talk to her about how unhappy he was, and she, as a very kind young woman, was friendly to him, would ask him if he wanted to join in going for a coffee and things like that. And unbeknownst to her, he got a copy of her keys, her house keys, and he had them cut. And he broke into her property and placed listening devices around her property, which he then would listen to and keep a log of everything that was going on in the property. She didn't know that this was happening at the time and carried on. And he then started with more conventional stalking behaviours, like following her and popping up everywhere she was. And anyway, I'm reading this as a young journalist, and this is embarrassing to admit, but I kind of didn't believe what I was reading. It was so unbelievable to me. And I started to think things like, this can't be true. Something else must have happened to have made this man behave like this. People just don't do things like this. And I'm embarrassed now telling you about my initial reaction. But actually, I've learned over the years that that's a fairly common reaction to hearing about stalking, because what happens in stalking cases is often so unbelievable. When I met the victim in the case, the victim survivor in the case, I realised that what had happened was absolutely true. This is a very long answer to your question.
Don't be silly. No, it's fine.
It led me to realise that, do you know what? Sometimes there are people out there who do not play by the same rules as the rest of us, and they want to hurt other people. And that's what that case was about. And so we made the documentary. I got to be friends with the woman that was involved in the case, who is absolutely amazing. Her strength of character and the way that she dealt with what had happened to her has inspired me throughout the rest of my career, because she set up a charity off the back of what had happened to her, which I was privileged enough to work with. And during the course of my involvement with that charity, Network for Surviving Stalking, I met many, many other people who had experienced being stalked. And I learned just how profoundly it affects people. I wanted to know more and more about stalking, because I just couldn't get my head round why someone would behave like this, why someone would deliberately set out to persecute somebody else, to just make their life unbearable. It just led me then to kind of devote the next 20 years really to learning as much as I could about stalking, speaking to as many people as possible who have been stalked, because they are the experts. Part of stalking is ex-partner stalking as well. So there are 5 different reasons why people stalk loosely, the experts have concluded, and ex-partner stalking is one of those. So this is where we come to the Hollie Gazzard Trust, because one day I was driving through the Forest of Dean, because I live in Gloucestershire, and I heard Nick Gazzard on the radio speaking about what had happened to his daughter Hollie. I just wanted to speak to him, so I did. He's such a lovely man, and we met up and we collaborated on a few things. I was so moved by the way that he spoke about what had happened to Hollie that sometime later, when he mentioned that the Trust had funded a post in Gloucestershire to help people who had been stalked with the aim of preventing what had happened to Hollie from happening to others, I kind of thought, oh, this is quite different to my role as a journalist, but I think it's an opportunity to actually see if I can do something to help. So I took that role, and yes, I've spent the past nearly 8 years working on the front line, learning so much about stalking and how it affects people and how it manifests itself in different ways. And yes, to say that I'm honoured now after that to be moving on to join the trust and take over from Nick leading the trust is, I just still can't get my head around it. I'm so honoured to have this opportunity.
From my point of view as a chair of the board as well, and just getting to know you and talking to you, it's big shoes to fill, isn't it? Because
absolutely,
he's absolutely an incredible human, as well as everything that he does outside of just being the CEO. And I can see in you that you're going to be able to take this forward and just be an incredible CEO. So thank you for joining the trust, and working with us all to move it forward. But are there any immediate goals that you want to implement as you take things on, or is it just to see where everything lies? And have you got anything in mind that you want to sort of hit the ground running with?
Well, firstly, I would say that this is my first post as a CEO. Mm-hmm. So I have a lot to learn, and I'm really looking forward to learning from you and obviously Nick and all the other fantastic team at Hollie Gazzard Trust, because they really are an amazing bunch, and everyone involved has such a heart feel for the charity and for Hollie as well. So they are a really super special bunch of people. So obviously, the first lesson I've learned is you learn from the people who know all about the trust. So that's obviously, what I'm going to do when I start the role. So I must say that. However, having had the experience that I've had, particularly recently, listening and learning to as many people as possible who have been stalked, I do have ideas and dreams really about what the trust can do going forward, because the potential that this charity has is I think absolutely phenomenal. One of the things that I feel very excited about, and it sounds quite a strange thing to say because this is a very difficult, serious area to talk about. Hollie's story has taught me and many people a lot. And what I have discovered working on the front line is that when people in Hollie's situation who are in an abusive or a controlling relationship, it's really difficult for them to get out of it. So I listened to the podcast that you had with Sam Billingham, which has been broadcast a few weeks ago. And there's so much that's relatable about her experience as somebody who had suffered coercive control. She really explains very well about how difficult it is to end a relationship. And you could see that with Hollie's relationship as well. It is really hard to leave, and it's really hard to access support when you're actually in the relationship. And Hollie didn't want to make a police statement, and she didn't feel the need for help when she was in the relationship. But there came a time that Hollie, and I have seen this with many other people in Hollie's situation, there came a time when she was ready to end the relationship. And at that point, that's when she asked for help. And that is an opportunity for everyone to help. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that we've quite got that right at the moment. So many of our services and support are geared up to help people leave relationships. But I think the support that's available when they do leave, I think could improve. The stalking side of things really does come into effect when someone leaves an abusive relationship, because what the law on stalking says in a nutshell is, if you don't want someone to contact you and they know that, and they keep contacting you, then any of that contact can be dealt with as stalking. That in a nutshell is what the law on stalking allows us to do.
Okay.
So once somebody in Hollie's situation has come to the point, and it takes a long time, that they want to end a relationship, if the person that they're ending the relationship with then continues to contact them, so it could be phone calls, following, presence, threats, anything really can come under the umbrella of stalking behaviour, then that is something that the criminal justice system can use to protect someone in her situation. And that area, so helping people in Hollie's situation, is something that I am really, really passionate about, because I think that people don't really understand the law on stalking. And for me, it's not perfect, but it just provides such a great opportunity to protect people. I always remember when I first met Nick Gazzard, he told me that there was one thing that he was really sure would have made a difference in Hollie's case. There are obviously lots of systems that we as pay our taxes towards to help keep people safe. But he said the one thing that I know would have kept her safe is if the door to the salon where she was working was locked. And it sounds really obvious, doesn't it? But it's true. We then have to look at, well, what are the conditions that would have led to that door being kept locked? And we unpick those. And I think that is where the law on stalking and the stalking approach comes in.
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually, because my little girl's school, for example, you know, the doors are locked. You have to ring the buzzer to get access into the reception and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, that makes a lot of sense. And I suppose flipping it slightly onto a property perspective, obviously, as a managing agent, we look after the communal areas of blocks of flats. We don't look after the inside of the flat itself, unless there's a leak or a fire or something like that. We've had it quite often whereby people will leave the communal door on the latch because they've got their pizza being delivered or an Amazon parcel's coming, or they'll give the code out to the delivery driver or something like that. But trying to get that information across, and I'm not saying that everybody is at risk of being assaulted or stalking or anything like that, but you don't know who else is living in that block of flats. You don't know if there is a vulnerable person living there who is terrified to leave their property for whatever reason, and then somebody leaves the door on the latch for the pizza guy or the Amazon delivery, and that person can then get in. It's actually made me think then actually that this is a bigger issue than a lot of people realise.
I'm really glad that you brought that up, because that is something that I have come across an awful lot. And it's a very small thing, isn't it, keeping the door locked? But actually, once you start to unpick it, because I have had Nick's comment about Hollie has been in my head all ever since I've heard it. And in order for the door to be locked, because it's a bit of an effort, isn't it? And it's a process that we all have to kind of just factor into our everyday life. About it's another thing that we have to do as part of our schedules is keep the door locked. So getting that in people's brains and making it part of their habit is actually, it's quite a complicated thing. But for me, it is about understanding risk, and it's led me to have many conversations with people about the need to lock doors, because I've spoken to many people who have been stalked that have worked in front-facing roles, or it may be to do with their accommodation, really similar as you've just described, Jodie. Well, I live in a block, there's lots of other people in there. They leave the door open, and I've discussed with these people, okay, well, how can we get over to the people that you live with or the customers in your shop when they come in about why it's important to have that door locked? And that's when you get into digging down from a victim survivor's perspective, how they maybe think about themselves, their own safety, their own worth, because it then involves going maybe and knocking on your neighbours' doors and having to tell them about why it's important that the doors are locked. And often I think as human beings, we want to assume the best. We want to assume that bad things aren't going to happen, because if we didn't, then it would be really, really difficult to get out of bed in the morning, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
But it is those sorts of difficult conversations that I think we all need to take responsibility for. In the job that I've recently left, I was working with high risk cases, doing risk assessments day in, day out. And I said to a police colleague once, because it's a big responsibility, risk assessing in cases like that. And I said, how do I know when I'm doing this job, which are the cases that are going to end up like Hollie Gazzard's, and which are the ones that aren't? Because I think, as you said, not it doesn't always happen. Bad things aren't going to happen. And I thought he was going to say something to me that would be a duh moment. And he said to me, the answer to that question is that you can't. We do have information about risk, but you can't. There isn't one thing that I can say to you that is going to reassure you on that front. So the takeaway from it is that we have to learn what the warning signs are, and we have to make sure that people are safe. Because yes, in most cases, really, really bad things don't happen, but when they do happen, they are so catastrophic, it just doesn't bear thinking about. So we all have to kind of develop that mindset, I think, and it's sensible to keep the door locked. Whether we're talking about something like stalking or domestic abuse or whatever, it's sensible to do things in a communal block, like keep the door locked so we know who's coming in and coming out.
Yeah, definitely. And you can have all of these fancy systems and Ring doorbell cameras, but trying to, I guess, raising that awareness to people around you, because people are oblivious, aren't they? They're getting on with their everyday life, especially in a city. Maybe you don't speak to your neighbour, you don't know about Mrs. Smith who's 80 years old on the ground floor. You don't really think about it if you're just trying to just get on with your day. And I guess where the trust comes in, and where they've always done this really well, is about raising that awareness and raising public awareness, I guess, around what could happen. It's preventing that and preventing people from being hurt or being stalked or worst case scenario being killed in their home or in their place of work. Educate people in order to recognise signs and recognise what is a potential risk. We can hopefully make the world a little bit of a better place.
Absolutely, it is prevention. I've had so many conversations with people during my career about going back to the door. What I say to people who say, well, do you know what, I can't keep saying to my neighbours about keeping the door locked, or I can't lock the door to the shop so that customers can't come in. And it's almost like they don't want to be a nuisance. They don't want to. There's other psychological things going on there about those conversations. But do you know what? It's like, what's the worst that could happen? What's the worst that can happen if you ask someone to keep the door locked? It's about valuing ourselves as individuals as well. And all too often it's a female thing as well. I think
is, yeah.
we don't want to make a fuss. We don't want to appear that we're being in any way difficult or putting people to an inconvenience, or and often that can be at work as well. We're trained to put our customers first, or our the people that use our products first. But I think it's I really don't think it's a bad thing to value ourselves and to send that message across to other people as well about how important it is to prioritise our safety, whether it's in the workplace or it's at our home. I mean, one of the things that I would say, that I'm sure that you've come up against this a lot in your work, is that when people experience problems in their home particularly, it has such a profound effect on their well-being. You know, we want to go back to our homes, you know, at night after we finish work, and it's our place of safety. It should be a haven. And when we don't feel like that at home, you know, you can often feel, well, there is nowhere that I feel safe. And, you know, that can be devastating, can't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that I've always championed. You know, why I do the job that I do is because I want to make sure that people do feel safe in their homes. And of course, there are going to be scenarios where you get a phone call at 9 o'clock at night that the communal door isn't locking, or there's a problem. As long as you can get that fixed as soon as as soon as physically possible, as soon as you can get somebody out there, don't just leave it because actually it's not that important, because they've got their own flat door. So even if somebody can get into the communal area, it doesn't really matter. You know, I've heard that numerous times, even from contractors. Oh, I'll get to that. They've got their own front door that they can lock. It's not a big deal. Well, actually, to some people, it is a big deal. You know, even if people, as I said earlier, are leaving it on the latch because they want to let the Amazon driver in or something like that, you know, it's really about considering other people. And yeah, I've heard it quite a few times from contractors, like, oh, I'll get to that, but it probably won't be for about a week. It's not that important. Well, actually it is, because it's somebody's home and it's somebody's safety, and they need that. And, you know, I think, as I said, the job that I do, it extends to workplaces as well, because from a commercial aspect, can you imagine how Hollie's colleagues felt watching what happened to her? You know, putting aside the horrific nature of not putting it aside, that sounds awful, but you know what I mean, like with, you know, it's horrendous what happened to her. It's horrendous for the family, but for the colleagues watching that happen, and it might have crossed their mind thinking, well, we only had to lock the door. We only had to lock the door and not really, in order to protect our team, or it's not actually that big a deal to do these little things. But I do notice now, actually, when I go to offices, you do have to buzz in now. You do have to press an intercom, or you can't just walk into places anymore. You don't have that shop front, especially in the property industry. You don't always have that shop front kind of just pop in as in when. You have to make appointments. You know, you have to get through a reception desk and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, how important is it for workplace safety and the work that the Trust are doing around women's safety and that sort of thing? How do you think that's going to evolve with the work that you do?
It is massively, massively important. Just going back though, what you said really struck a chord with me, which is it's the little things, and that's what we've got to get over to people, because you know, you have an emergency crisis situation going. Everyone can see, you know, what that is. We've got the statutory services who respond to that, but actually the thing is about stalking and controlling behaviours, those sorts of abusive behaviours, they are really insidious and they are really subtle, and they are little things. So it will be things like text messages or phone calls. It's nothing really dramatic, but it's that bigger picture. And what I would really like everyone to understand is the little things that we can do, like having a rule about keeping the door locked, for an example, or not putting people through, but putting phone calls through without doing proper safety checks, or making sure that all our policies and processes are really sensitive to this type of thing. All those things, which are, you know, little things that we do in our day-to-day life, they make a massive, massive difference. So I just wanted to pick up on that. But workplace safety and policies and processes, it's so important, Jodie. I mean, I've come across so many people, women and men, who have been abused because of their jobs, because of the roles that they do, and the impact that has had on them is absolutely devastating as individuals. But then this type of behaviour also has massive consequences for workplaces as well. You know, the online world and digital abuse, cyber stalking, whatever we want to call it, you know, very often can impact an organisation's reputation. It's a no-brainer. You know, organisations have a duty of care legally to protect their staff, to risk assess and make sure that they are safe at work. That's a basic one. But then, you know, what does it say about an organisation that doesn't value the safety of the people that are working there? You know, it's just on every single level from a business perspective, it's the right thing to do. And I think that it just provides so many different opportunities as well. Once you start digging down into how we can improve the safety in our workplace and look after and value the people that work for us and our customers as well. So, you know, it's something that every good organisation needs to take on board. And there's so many exciting things that are happening. The Women's Safety Charter, so excited about taking that forward and seeing how we can get as many people, you know, involved and organisations involved in that as possible. That's a really exciting area that you know, we want as many people as possible, don't we, to get in touch with Hollie Gazzard Trust and make that into, you know, make it achieve its potential.
Yeah, I mean, that is an incredible offering from the trust. And I'm hoping, so Rich Gray, obviously, he does a lot of that with businesses in the area, and I want to try and get him onto the podcast to specifically talk about the Women's Safety Charter. So if anyone's listening and wants to know more, obviously just let us know. But from a professional aspect, have you ever come across somebody who, I mean, you said earlier about the guy who put the listening devices in, but what did the workplace actually do in that case? Did they protect her in any way?
Well, that case was very interesting because it was before there were really any bespoke laws to deal with it. So it was it was very difficult. And what often happened stalking is fixated obsessive behavior. There is a mnemonic called 4: fixated, obsessive, unwanted and repeated behaviors. Okay. And that's something that everybody can bear in mind. But when you're dealing with a case of stalking where you've got that repeated behavior that isn't taking, because it's driven by a fixated mindset, it's quite, it sort of sets it apart, and it requires a really specialist approach, because what you can sometimes do is put other people at risk if you don't deal with that appropriately. So somebody who just tells someone to leave that person alone, let's say somebody is fixated with you, Jodie, as an example, and one of your work colleagues says, well, let me have a word with this person. Potentially they are putting themselves in the firing line then, because the fixated mindset of a stalker would be, well, if it wasn't for her work colleague, Jodie would want to see me. And so the work colleague then, you know, could potentially be at risk. So there are, anyone that comes across that fixated obsessive behavior, they really do need to seek specialist report. Don't sit on it. Take it really, really seriously to start off with. But have I come across cases in my career where workplaces have not dealt with stalking? Yes. Absolutely I have. And do you know what? I cannot sit in judgment of anybody, because going back to when I was a journalist and I first heard about the stalking case that I was reporting on, it didn't make sense to me. I kind of tried to make common sense of it and adjust it into my own frame of reference. And you know what? I couldn't. And so that's what I see an awful lot when people experience behavior like this, is that well-meaning people, I'm being kind, some people maybe, but well-meaning people will often try to use their own frame of reference to deal with something, and that can very often go very badly wrong. So the sorts of things that will happen is you might have somebody saying, well, look, this is 6 of one and half a dozen of the other, and let's get you together, sit you down and have a chat about this. That is a really bad idea when we're dealing with fixated people, because you're giving a message to the victim that you're on the same level as the person that's abusing you here. And if somebody who's a bit more mature and sensible comes in and deals with it on your behalf, we can sort it out. So it's quite offensive as well. Yeah. It can make the victim feel isolated, that nobody really understands them. And I think once you have been brave enough to tell someone what's happening and that person doesn't believe you or respond in a positive way, what are you going to do? You're going to think, well, okay, I can't tell anyone about this because nobody really understands it. So that's something that you see an awful lot. It is just a failure to take this behavior seriously. The kind of approach of, well, let me have a word with this person. Again, it can make things worse for, as I explained, because the person that's then intervening can be seen as almost like a blocker. And there have been a number of cases where people have been seriously hurt and even killed because they've been perceived as blocking the fixated person's ability to contact the person they're obsessed with. Then you've got things like, a lack of policies and just, it's just a general failure to deal with the situation seriously, and therefore make sure that steps are put in place to use it as a symbol to keep the door locked. Yeah. They don't feel that there is a need for that. And using the locked door as a symbol, it's maybe prioritizing the business over keeping the door locked. So we can't lock the door because we need people to be able to come in. We need people to access us. And I understand that on a surface level, but trust me, nobody wants a situation like this to end badly. You really, really do not at all. So if we can make those little changes to make sure that the people are safe, then, it's in everyone's interest to do that. And again, it's about the message that the business is sending to people. Social responsibility is a really, really important element of any business, and demonstrating that we care about the people's safety that we work for is basic, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember, it's brought this to the front of my mind actually. So I was 24, and I remember the age because it was pretty much a year after I lost my dad. And there was a guy who was probably, I'm not very good with ages, but early 60s maybe. So I was quite young and he was not. And, or in comparison to me anyway. And he would send me emails. Now we worked in a small office. There was only about 6 or 7 of us. And it was, in the block management world, it was like my first go, if you like, of residential block management. I'd done commercial prior to that. And he would send me emails saying, oh, do you want a coffee? Oh, yeah, that'd be lovely. That'd be lovely. Thank you very much. And he said his name then. That'd be lovely. Thank you. And I just thought he was being a friendly co-worker. And then it would be emails saying, we should go for lunch, which I never did, I have to say. And I was like, oh, no, I brought lunch with me, thank you. And then it would be, oh, I think we're soulmates. But don't tell anybody. He was married as well. but don't tell anybody. Don't do this, don't do that. But I think that, you know, we've got this connection and all that. And I was 24, but I plucked up the courage and I went to my boss about it and I said, look, this is making me really, really uncomfortable. I don't like it at the end of the day when it's just me and him in the office. It's making me feel really unsafe. And the answer that I got was, he's just trying to be a father figure to you because you've lost your dad. I'm not sure about anybody else's dad, but my dad never said that we were soulmates, because that would be weird. And it was just completely dismissed. And then when I brought it up again, they basically said, it's because of the way you dress. Now, I wasn't one to be going in mini skirts, but even if I had, would have made no difference. He still shouldn't have been saying it to me. But I did dress smartly, and I liked wearing sort of high heels and that sort of thing, you know. But what's the way that I dressed got to do with anything? I told him that I didn't like it. I told my bosses that I didn't like it. I wasn't being a martyr. I wasn't being awkward. I was just saying, please stop it. And nobody protected me, and I had to leave in the end. It was quite an unpleasant experience, and then I left the industry for a year. I did come back, but I left the industry for a year because I thought, well, what if that happens again? So my question to you, I guess, is, now that there are more policies and procedures in place within a workplace, how do you think companies can support their staff more without doing the whole, as you just explained, oh, I'll have a word with them, or let's get you in a room? Because surely that gives voice to the person doing it. Does that make sense?
Oh, does it make sense? Yes, absolutely. And if I had £1 for every time I had... In fact, Judy, I don't think I know a woman who hasn't had a story like the one that you have just told me. I mean, I could tell you many, many stories of my own life as well, where, you know, you just have to laugh it off, because if you don't. So, you know, and we've gone past I'm old, we've gone through the Me Too movement now. But, you know, and I really hope that that young women are more confident, and the messages that they have from society enables them to be more confident about situations like that. But you know what, I'm not completely convinced about that, but I come back to the stalking approach, because it is about setting boundaries, is the stalking approach. And I think that this is really generalizing, but I think that women have not been great at learning to set boundaries. I think that we have thought that it's somehow rude or unfriendly to set boundaries. And again, I just come back to the stalking law, that it says if somebody knows that you don't want them to contact you and they keep contacting you, then you know, we're in the territory there of someone committing a criminal offence. Now, I know that that's very early stages, and most people will, well, I'm not going to phone the police if someone asks me to go for a coffee. But please bear in mind, we are in the territory of committing a criminal offence if somebody won't leave you alone and pester you. And what I say to people that I speak to is, okay, you've been asked to go for a coffee, and it's made you feel really uncomfortable, but you want to be polite, so you're just, I think, what did you say to the man? Oh, I can't.
So I said no for lunch.
You said no for lunch, but you said that you didn't say no.
I didn't. I said I had lunch with me.
You have lunch with you.
Yeah, because I didn't want to be rude.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, exactly. Now, I think this is sometimes quite difficult for men to understand, and I don't find it helpful sometimes to kind of make this really gendered, but it is. But what you've done there is you haven't said no, I don't want to come for lunch with you. You're inappropriate. You say, well, I can't because I brought some lunch in.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's generally what we do as women, isn't it? Because we want to soften the blow and be polite. But actually, let's twist this around. You have a young man that starts working in your office. Would you in a million years send a message like that to him? No. And when you twist it around, you can kind of think, well, actually, do you know what? When I've done that and think about me doing that to somebody, I can really see how inappropriate that is. So that's on a personal level. But to answer your question, it's about workplace culture, isn't it? Mm-hmm. It's about workplace culture, and it is about, creating environments where sending an email like that or behaving like that would just be clearly absolutely unacceptable. And I think that's what we've got to do. And one of the reasons that I think Hollie Gazzard Trust is such a fantastic charity is when you hear Nick speak about his daughter, who and how the family have suffered the extreme consequences of controlling and abusive behaviour. And you look at the audiences that listen to him, and you speak to people that have listened to Nick, many of whom are men, and straight away they get it because it's a man talking about his daughter. Mm-hmm. That's a really, really important message that, we are talking about women who are people's daughters, who are very important people in their own right, and it's not okay to treat women like this. And I think that is something that I think is a really positive message that everybody gets, and I think that's what we can use the trust to keep pushing forward. It's creating that environment where, do you know what, I wouldn't be happy if you spoke to my daughter like that, and I'm not happy if you speak to the woman that sits by the photocopier like that. It's it's out of order. We need to bring everybody with us here. Everybody that you speak to with any modicum of decency wants to stop violence against women and girls. And I think we have to make that conversation inclusive. These are people's daughters that we're talking about, and we all must play our part to create environments where they are safe and can flourish and achieve their potential. Let's make a business case for that. It's diversity inclusion. We know that business places are healthier and achieve more and more innovative if women are and people who are different are able to sort of flourish.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And if you don't mind, I just flip it slightly into a professional setting, but from a business customer perspective. So our industry, the block management industry, and property in general, to be fair, can be quite difficult in terms of abusive behaviour towards us as professionals. And that has been highlighted quite significantly in the Property Institute's wellbeing survey that they do every year. And within that survey, there are statistics within it to say, have you felt unsafe in your job, either physically or emotionally? And those statistics are getting worse. And people are leaving, not just leaving the job, as in the company that they work for, they are leaving the industry. And we're losing incredibly talented people because of the abuse that we suffer. Now, post-Grenfell, which was obviously horrific, the horrific fire in a block of flats in London, that has brought about numerous legislation changes, numerous policies that basically mean that the leaseholder within that block of flats has to pay a ridiculous amount of money to rectify the problems with cladding on their building. Now, that has trickled down the line to be the managing agent's job to deliver that information. We haven't made that policy. We haven't made the cladding. We're not the contractors charging the money. We are literally the voice that gives that bad news and then have to demand that money from these leaseholders who, quite rightly, shouldn't have to pay for it and in many cases don't have the money to pay for it. Now, going back to the abuse side of it, we are really, really struggling in the industry, whereby we have to have that customer first approach. The customer is always right approach. And I still believe in that. And I still believe that most people in our industry, and I would say, a high amount of people in our industry don't do it because it is a very thankless task. And we do it because we want to keep people safe. We want to make sure that their property is managed and they've got a beautiful home to live in and everybody is happy. But my point, how can you take that stalking law, and you said about 4, how do you take that approach and bring that into a business to customer situation? How can we as an industry and industry leaders protect their staff from the level of abuse that we get?
So to start off with, everybody deserves the right to be safe at work, and that is enshrined in the Health and Safety at Work Act as well. So it's enshrined in the law that people have a right to be safe at work. Many roles involve dealing with people who are angry or maybe don't like, they have to deal with difficult situations. I mean, you go into pretty much every single shop you can think of these days, GP surgeries, and there are signs up saying our staff will not tolerate abuse. I think post-COVID as well, the general level of anger from people is really high. And it is so, abusive behaviour, violent, aggressive behaviour is any healthy workplace has policies around that, about the zero tolerance to abuse. Now, focusing in on stalking, this is where it gets interesting. So stalking is fixated, obsessive, unwanted and repeated behaviours. There are different reasons why people stalk, but just answering your question, there is a particular typology of stalker called a resentful stalker. And these are individuals who are motivated by a sense of injustice that they feel. So they are upset about something that often is real. There is something that has happened that they feel has been unjust to them. But putting a stalker slant on this, these individuals would have an inability to reframe their thinking around this injustice. So in a business, somebody feels angry or let down over something, customer service or whatever it might be. Now, a stalker mindset, rather than just deal with, oh, do you know what? I'm angry about that sort of how, and they might have said something aggressive or abusive, but where the stalking behaviour comes in, it's about a fixation with the injustice and a continuation of that behaviour. Offenders will have an inability to reframe their mindset about their thinking. It's persistent. There's a statistic that 77% of stalking victims don't report until over 100 incidents have happened. So to anyone in a workplace who is getting repeated contact from somebody who is very angry about the way that they have been treated, and you're getting bombarded by emails or phone calls, or maybe the person's turning up at an office and they absolutely are obsessed by whatever it is that they want to achieve, whether it's getting an apology or who knows what it might be. Please remember the law on stalking, that if once somebody knows that their behaviour is unwanted and is causing distress, once they know that, if they persist in that, then they are in the territory of committing a criminal offence. And in my experience, people who serve other people in their work will put up with horrendous levels of abuse because they believe it is their job to do that. It isn't. It is nobody's job to be on the receiving end of abusive behaviour. They don't deserve it. They're doing their best in most cases, and they do not go to work to get abused. That's another thing that I'm really passionate about, is making sure that anyone in a workplace understands what the law on stalking says. They have proper policies and processes in place that reflect that, because there are all sorts of measures that the criminal justice system can take to protect someone in the workplace from stalking.
It's a strange one as well, because I also had another situation a few years back. I was struggling myself personally at the time. I'd not long had my daughter. I was in that whole I did have postnatal depression. Not that I admitted that at the time, but I did. I was trying to keep the business going and everything, and there was a situation with a guy who was the director of one of the buildings that I managed. They weren't listening to me over something in respect of fire safety. And I said something along the lines of, I'm sorry that you feel that way, but this is the law, and this is what I have to adhere to, and this is what I have to advise you upon. If you're not going to give me permission to do this, it's not appropriate for me to be your managing agent anymore, because I cannot take that risk on the business, on my reputation, on my insurance, all that kind of stuff. He went absolutely ballistic. We did part ways professionally, but from that point, he would send me abusive emails. He would set up fake Instagram accounts to troll me online. I did report him. I had to get solicitors involved, but I reported him to the police, and they did nothing. They said it wasn't a crime, what he was doing. Again, using the stalking element of things that you've been explaining. And I'm not going to sit here and say that he stalked me, because in the grand scheme of things and what other people go through, he didn't. But he did make my life miserable for a period of time. And it was just nothing to the police. They were just like, no, whatever.
Wow, there's so much to unpick there. So to start off, you said this isn't stalk. I'm not saying I'm being stalked. I cannot tell you how often I have heard that from people. It's like, I feel people like they need to have like a stranger sitting outside a tree in their house, wearing a hood or something, in order to qualify them to say, well, I am being stalked. Stalking is so common. It's so common. And one of the problems is that people do not call stalking behaviour stalking, because there's a real reluctance to do that. I'm listening to what you have told me, and straight away I would, in my view, I would regard that as stalking, absolutely. So let me twist it back on you. Would you behave like he did towards somebody else? Would you set up a fake Instagram account to troll somebody because you weren't very happy with the decision they made?
No, of course not. Of course not. I mean, people's behaviour baffled me most of the time, to be fair. But, I've had it in another situation whereby, if I didn't respond to an email within 2.5 seconds, then that person would be viewing my profile on LinkedIn and then sending me an email saying, well, obviously you're too busy because you're at a conference on a jolly or something like that. It's like, conferences really aren't jollies. But, at the same time, why are you going on my LinkedIn to see what I've posted or where I am, and then send me an email about what you've seen on my profile? That's just weird as well.
Again, everything, all the examples that you're giving me highlight people transgressing boundaries, and that's where stalking starts. And so how that interfaces with the law is, if somebody knows or ought to know that you don't want them to contact you, and they so we have to get people confident enough to be able to communicate that. But once somebody knows that the behaviour is unwanted, if they persist with it, then they are in the territory of potentially committing a criminal offence. Now, you mentioned that you reported the Instagram situation to the police, and you were told that there wasn't any offence. Now, it's not going to be breaking news to know that sometimes the criminal justice system doesn't recognise stalking. Like, lots of people don't. Police officers are only human at the end of the day, and there has been a very big problem with the criminal justice system not dealing with stalking. And we're Hollie Gazzard Trust, along with all our partners in this area are going to be, working with the government to make sure that every person that's being stalked gets better service. That's one of our quests going forward. So, because somebody says, well, I can't help you, that should not mean that we leave people unsafe. It's not what I say to people. And using your examples are perfect. That's not normal behaviour to do that. Flip it. If anyone's in a situation where someone's behaviour is freaking them out, we automatically think, is this me? Have I done something wrong? Why is somebody behaving? What have they done? What could I have done? Because that's the way that we're brought up. We give people the benefit of the doubt, and I have seen people do that time and time and time again and ending up tolerating or putting up with behaviour that is absolutely horrendous because it's so gradual, and you just think. So what I say to anyone in that situation is just flip it and just think, would I do that to somebody else? And I think once you've done that, you can really see what the reality of a situation is and trust your instinct. It's not okay to behave like that. It's not normal to behave like that. And it should send a very big alarm bell ringing when someone is behaving in that fixated, obsessive, unwanted and repeated way. It's not normal. Take notice of that, because as we know in the case of Hollie Gazzard, really fixated and obsessive behaviour, it's difficult to deal with in itself, but it can escalate and it can result in serious catastrophic harm. So anyone on the receiving end of any kind of behaviour like that, and please don't do what you've done, Jodie, and say, well, I it's not so serious. Nearly every single person I have ever spoken to who's been stalked has said that. They think about really catastrophic things like Hollie. Well, what's happening to me isn't as bad as that. No, but it's a trajectory. Yeah. You see behaviour, you experience behaviour that makes you feel unsettled, that is like, that's not right. That's not right. I would never do that. No, I wouldn't do that. That's very, very strange. Please take notice of it.
Yeah. So how can industry leaders, the Property Institute, everybody who's involved in my industry and beyond, how can we incorporate policies? Because we have the Property Institute very kindly wrote a policy that we can all put on, every managing agent can put on their website, the unreasonable behaviour policy, and we can stop people from doing persistent calls, that sort of thing, but they still have the right to write to us, to email us. So how can we then incorporate the stalking side of it and the perspective around that? How can we incorporate that into our policy? If the emails then become so persistent that members of staff are scared to go to that block of flats, they cannot physically do their job because they cannot go to the site. They cannot do, I talk about lone working all the time, they cannot do their job because if they go to that site, that person may be there. If you're reading the emails, you think, oh God, I don't want to come up against that person face to face, male or female. And it could be a male or female property manager as well that I'm talking about. This isn't just a women's problem. So how can we incorporate the two, do you think, the unreasonable behaviour policy, the stalking laws, and bring something together for the property industry?
This is a really exciting opportunity, isn't it? So you've told me that you have a situation where there's repeated behaviour that is frightening people. Instantly, my alarm bells are ringing. Yeah. So we've got that repeated contacting. And yeah, it's easy to be a keyboard warrior and just fire things off. But I'm looking at what's motivating the behaviour. Why is somebody behaving like that? And instantly my response is, okay, this needs a proper look at and a proper risk assessment. And we need to dig down into what's happening here with this person. There could be a whole load of other risk factors that we don't know about. And it's not okay to just sit that on our shoulders and just kind of take that common sense of approach. Oh, I'm sure it'll be okay. It needs everything to do with stalking behaviours needs a proper risk-based approach to it. So And the legislation on stalking, in that if somebody knows or ought to know that their behaviour is unwanted and they continue with it, then they are in the territory of committing a criminal offence. So that is a matter for the police. Stalking focuses on one individual. So you might have somebody who's fixated with one particular worker or member of staff, or it could be as an organisation more generally. I've come across that for sure. But there are certainly, legal measures and orders. There's a whole host of things that can be put in place to protect people. What I would advise is that, the police need to be aware of that. The criminal justice system can't act if it doesn't know anything about it. And I think all too often what I've seen is that it's the attitude, well, it's my work, it's a customer, or it's somebody, I have to deal with somebody, we have to just kind of proceed with this. And I have been absolutely horrified when I've heard about some of the repeatedly abusive situations that professionals at work have been subjected to, because they think that nobody can help, that it's part of their job to do that. So it isn't. And what's the worst thing can happen? That it's reported to the police and the police say that there's nothing that can be done about it. What have you lost by reporting anything to the police? And if the police don't deal with it in a way that gives you an outcome, there are other legal measures, there are injunctions, there are all sorts of things that can happen. I think, I don't want to make policy on the hoof here, but the number one rule is do not just accept it. We need to find solutions to this, and there are solutions, but it's about flagging it as unacceptable, and therefore having those policies in place that trigger that response, which in my view has to involve, the criminal justice system. Not even if it's just about sort of prevention, it's about the safeguarding element as well.
Wow, that's been an incredible conversation, Jane. Thank you so much. Is there anything you'd like to add before I let you go?
I hope what I've communicated has come over clearly, particularly about the lock on the door element and the stuff about the rejected ex-partner stalkers.
No, you've been brilliant. How can people find you if they wish to do so?
Contact us at Hollie Gazzard Trust, so via the website.
Okay, no problem. Well, thank you so much for your time, and I'll pop any contact details in the show notes anyway.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my latest podcast. You can find me on LinkedIn and Instagram. The links are in the show notes. Or you can contact me on jodie@jodiefraser.com. For more content and updates, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on your favourite platforms. Thank you once again for listening. Until next time, take care.